right, your election headquarters this morning here on the Super Morning Show. We're sharing best performing ministers in this administration, head and deputy head of our political desk, and deputy head of the political desk. Evans Mensah and Winston Amoa have gone through the list, the tall list, and they have come up with their top two. We want to hear from you, so send us your WhatsApp messages on your top two best performing ministers in this administration. 055 You can send us your tweets, joy997 on Twitter, and use the hashtag joysms. Evans, did you find it difficult selecting your best two performing ministers?
In fact, it was so difficult when Winston first reached out and said where I should circulate my top three. I'm like, Winston, I beg you, ask for top three. I can't find it.
Really?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, I was struggling. First of all, he said I should give him my top three. And I went through the first one, and second one, and then third one, I kept struggling. I just couldn't find it. I'm like, then he said, okay, it's okay, let's just do top two. Because honestly, it's been shambolic all around. I mean, it's just been, just look at where we are as an economy. And it tells you a lot about the how this entire economy has been managed. The evidence is there. If you are part of a management team of a company that goes bankrupt, everybody else takes the blame for it. It tells you that the entire management of that company has failed. Let's take multimedia as an example, as a corporate entity. If multimedia goes bankrupt, just as Ghana has now, we can't pay our debt. That's what it is. We are bankrupt. Then you cannot excuse anybody. You can't absolve anybody of blame, from the chief executive to the least of the managers in that firm, in that company. They will all take equal blame. And so when you then ask me to now choose the best performing manager of a group that had collectively run a company, a firm, into bankruptcy, Mama, did you begin to appreciate why it becomes difficult?
I do get you, but with the example that you've just cited, you still can point to some fantastic editors. You can look at features, articles, their write-ups.
No. That won't come up. I'm talking about managers. I'm not talking about employees and staff. I mean, that's not what I'm talking about. Managers. I'm talking about CEO, the board, the COO. I mean, managers. I'm talking about the exco, not me and you. We are common floor members. We are staff, right? It would be difficult then to ask me to say choose among the executive management team who is the best manager. When they collectively run the company aground, they have led it into bankruptcy. That is the analogy I want you to appreciate.
Yeah, I appreciate that. But before you go on, isn't the economy an aspect of governance? Don't we have other areas?
Such as, let's go through it. Let's do it. Let me humor you. Let me humor you. Let's go through it. So, economy. Let's do.
We have tourism, for instance. Sector. I mean, it's not the fiscal economy.
We are breaking it down. So let's do the part of the economy that really matter to us. The agri sector.
Mm-hmm.
We all know it's been shambolic too in the last whatever. You say tourism, yeah. I mean, the saving grace has been the decision of the diaspora to come here in droves to spend a few dollars during Christmas. So between Christmas and New Year, after that, what happens? I mean, I'm not taking away from the positive, the positive of the beyond the return and the return. It's a fantastic idea. So tourism has been good, right? in that you have to look at it. It happens in periods, and they've marketed Ghana. I saw some fantastic advert on CNN the last time. So but that's tourism. And if you ask many people, in the context of the things that really matter to us, tourism is good because in a crisis like this, Kitui Biensa. So the Dave Chappelles of this world who come and spend a few dollars, we need it. We need it very much. So yeah. But look at the other areas of this great country of ours, and you hardly find something else that you could say manage excellently. I mean, if we have, it all comes down to what the ordinary person is feeling. And that is why now I have to dovetail into the question. So you have to now look at that and then ask yourself, in the midst of this challenge, can you find two ministers who have, in the face of the challenge, managed it better than most? And I come down to two. So can I go ahead now and
no.
isolate my two?
Before you do that, was it difficult for you, Winston, coming up with your two? You came up with the idea of three.
Well, yes, I came up with the idea of three because, ordinarily you're looking at first, second, third, probably, or you probably want to go for top five. And so top five was always going to be difficult. So I said, let's do a top three. But when I had come up with the idea of a top three, I hadn't really settled on what the top three was going to be.
Right.
So I was then going to develop my criteria, and then you would use the criteria to look at it and say, who are those that you're going to select? Also because you see, that issue is that you're going through challenging times at this moment. And if you're going through challenging times at this moment, you're asking yourself the question, who becomes your top performing ministers? Because, I mean, you've had the roads minister consistently promising us the construction of the Accra-Tema motorway. He says people are going to be on site. The finance minister has gone to parliament. He says,
but there's work on the whole
please,
stretch.
hold on a minute. He's gone to parliament. He says, you're going to start this in September this year. It didn't happen. But you see, yes, you're talking about work on the Ofanko stretch. Fantastic. But I'm also talking about work on the motorway. I'm talking about, work on the Dodowa Road. That's supposed to be a beneficiary of the Sino Hydro deal. It would be based on our criteria. So we'd all put our criteria together. We're going to do this. Because if you look at the road networks in this country, if you tell me you've constructed in excess of 10,000 kilometers of road under this government, and it's because you did that also by having new roads or grading of roads, not done anything really. And so for me, when I'm measuring your performance, these are things we use for propaganda. I mean, we threw out figures, and that's been the major problem of this government. The government likes throwing out figures all the time. And sometimes, look, you say in the history of the Fourth Republic, no government has performed better than us in this, in that. You draw attention to it, and we begin to dig into it and say, now let's look at it. You see, I have constructed more roads. Okay. What are these roads that you've constructed? You've done asphalt relay over 1,500 kilometers, for instance. That's asphalt overlay. Some of these roads even have a very bad foundation. But then you've gone ahead, and in no time, you see the roads deteriorating. So when we begin to get into it, and it's good for government, any governance anyway, because once you draw attention to it, we will analyze it and come back to say, this is what you've done.
Right.
You've talked about, the beyond the return and all. These are things that find themselves in the office of the president also. So while you're looking at it, yes, you can probably say, the tourism ministry, but beyond the return is a secretariat under the office of the president. So where am I going to credit? Who do I credit for these successes and all of that? So the difficulty is there. The difficulty is there. So then you begin to look around and say, do I settle on two or do I settle on one? One becomes a bit difficult because at least make it two.
All
and
right.
then you get two persons, taking credit for what you've done.
Okay, so Winston and Evans, you've settled on two. Evans, let's hear your two and why. Hello, Evans. Evans.
My two, in no particular order for a start, the energy minister. The energy minister because he's kept the lights on in the midst of an unprecedented economic crisis, the biggest crisis of our generation. He's managed to keep the lights on, and he takes credit for it. We know that in the past, the challenge we've had with with keeping the lights on, do so, has always been a financial challenge. Our capacity to find the money and to finance the importation of the gas and the fuel we need to power plants has been the main challenge to our ability to keep the lights on. Every now and then you have technical challenges too, capacity challenges, ability to build more capacity, to invest in more plants and to expand the power generation capacity. That is largely now because we have enough capacity over the years, from the John Mahama administration leading all the way to this current administration. We build capacity, so that's no issue. The key issue will be financing the powering of these plants once you've invested in them, and it takes billions and billions of dollars to do that. I simply still really am amazed at how the energy minister has found a way to keep the lights on in the midst of this crisis. And let's go back into history. The first sign in history in the Fourth Republic, the first sign of an economic problem you see with Dumso. Dumso has always been, gives you the first indication that the economy is about to struggle. The Mills, John Mahama administration is a perfect example of this. When Mills came in 2010, 2011, we had the growth rate of around 15%, the fastest growing economy in the world. Everything was fine. And then latter part of if I'm not mistaken, 2011, 2012, the Dumso set. And it sort of started signaling that there was going to be a challenge with the economy. Not surprising that in 2013, 2014, we saw it come to a head when we went to the IMF. You go to Kufuor's term, we had hipping. And if anybody remember, Kufuor also had to battle with Dumso for a long, long time. When the economic crisis started, we had to deal with hipping. Rawlings had his own Dumso, again, in the midst of an economic crisis. And so you were expecting, I won't lie to you, when the economic challenge started sometime last year, the first thing I did when I noticed that the economy was about to struggle, I went to buy a generator. I bought a genset because I just knew that with where we are going, with the COVID and the pandemic challenges that was hitting the economy, I expected that we'll start struggling to find the money to keep servicing the mini plans and the public-private partnership agreements we signed with IPPs, etc., that we're possibly going to struggle to find the resources to power the genset. So I instantly went to buy. And what happens is that it immediately Dumso starts, price of gensets go up. So I invested. And I was expecting Dumso to hit. We are in 2023 January, and there's no sign of Dumso. And I think Mantopoku Prempeh, by the way, who I haven't met personally before, but just looking at his work and the fact that my lights are on, you must give him credit. And for me, that's why I pick him. And then secondly, the second minister will be a man who has faced, a young minister who has faced possibly one of the biggest challenges. And I always say, leaders emerge in crisis. The magnitude of the challenge you face defines who you are. As they say, diamond is forged in fire. So they appoint Samuel Bujinapo as the Lands and Natural Resources Minister, and then we know that in that field, defined is Galamsey. This president hung his own around it, and largely hasn't succeeded in winning the fight. John Peter Amewo, a good friend of mine, became a minister, fought it very hard, didn't quite succeed. Governments have struggled with this. And then this young minister, who was just coming off the back of being, his highest position is held as coming back of being a deputy chief of staff, is elevated to that position. I feared for him when he was appointed. But if you put all in context and the way he's handled it, he hasn't achieved everything. We all know Galamsey still remains an issue. But I remember very clearly when he came in first and he started the fight again in conjunction with the defense ministry. And they were burning the excavators. I unashamedly supported that policy of burning the excavators. I said as much on Newsfile. People criticized me for it. But I said, well, what do you expect? You want to go to court? You take them, seize it, and hand it over to the police? Why are we surprised that in a Western region recently, excavators were still becoming a ton issue? Police now fighting a DCE over where the excavators are, missing excavators. We still wanted to put them together and hand it over to the police to handle. I thought banning it was, and he did so. And he did it so for a while. It worked for a while. We all sort of saw some benefits of that, and then we sort of went to bed again, and then it resurged. But in all, if you look at the policies that he's introduced, the tightening of the law to make it a bit more punitive if you're arrested. I think it's 25 years now if you're arrested. If you look at the red zone policy that had been implemented, the forest reserve conversation, and Akunta mining is such a tragic story, right? But even there, we've seen that the investigations that had been done, and the last time I did a check, the entire dossier that this minister had put together had been handed over to the CID to prosecute, and we also have now the special prosecutor involved in it, and there's been full collaboration there in terms of the work that he's coordinated to try and investigate and give to the police to investigate. And I think it's really unfortunate. The president made the comments he made recently, almost absolving Akunta Mining of any blame when the institutions of state are about to do a proper job on this. I thought that was unfortunate. And it, again, it makes the job of this minister I'm talking about, Abu Janapo, a bit more difficult. If you look at that, and then look at the way he handled this John Matter. And for me, the thing that did it for me when he said categorically in the statement that regardless of what happens with all the investigations surrounding Sir John's estate and the forest reserve, one thing he can assure he will not benefit from the possession of forest reserves and the Achimota forest. That all, regardless of the outcome, as a minister, he's using his authority to say that will not go to that individual, as in Sir John. He made that statement categorically at a time when there was still a lot of investigation still happening, but he had already taken the decision that whatever the outcome, I will make sure that he doesn't benefit. His estate, that forest remains that state property. And I think that's a very courageous, bold step, considering who Sir John was in the party, and considering the powers that would have conspired to put that in the will. For a young minister to stand up and say that was quite courageous for me. And so they will be my top two. Okay. The second defined by the challenges that he faced, and the first because he kept my lights on. One of the most difficult things to do in this country, especially in the midst of an economic crisis.
Okay, so the top two best performing ministers for advancements are Dr. Matthew Opoku Prempeh, the energy minister, because he's kept the lights on. The second is Samuel Abu Janapo, the lands and natural resources minister, how he's handled the Galamsey fight. The fight has not been won, but you're awarding his effort, essentially. Winston.
Well, I think that the first person would be the Greater Accra Regional Minister, Henry Quartey, and I'd explain why. So, look, when I'm still not old, but when I was a very young reporter, the moment I thought about that statement, I said, I'm still not old. I mean, when I was a very young reporter, one of the challenges we had always, known about was the Lavender Hill and the decision to relocate the sellers from Agboboloshi to Ajen Kotoku. Yeah. In fact, we had been taken to Ajen Kotoku and had seen the box, distribution point that were going to be, set up. And minister after minister struggled to do that.
Right.
He was the only person who was able to move these traders from Agbogboloshi to Ajenkotoku. Now, he's one person who's got Ghanaians talking about the real role of a regional minister. And you've heard in other quarters, certain regional ministers have been tasked to actually study Henry Korte. We saw the moment when he went around with, soldiers, policemen, people who had complained about the construction of a footbridge, only for a footbridge to be constructed, and still defied the usage of the footbridge and wanted to be crossing the road anyhow. He said you cannot do that. People had complained about, how he went about it. But it's part of the reason we have said in this country that, even in the practice of our democracy, we have applauded, Paul Kagame all the time, and I've said he's done wonderful things in, Rwanda. But we just don't want to find out how he did those wonderful things in Rwanda. Okay? This man has been able to instill discipline. And I like it when he says, you are going to do this. Whatever you do, we will do this. And he did it. He did it, and it's been successful. I mean, he's complaining about how people sometimes come to him and say they're not going to vote for him, but he was still determined to get the right things done.
Because he is an MP.
Yes, he's an MP. And one of the things politicians fear all the time is losing election.
Right.
And, we saw it in 2020 where ministers who lost the election were not retained as ministers. That's fact. The president was categorical. If you went into the elections and lost, you're not coming back as a minister. But Henry Korte, still, coming in as Greater Accra Regional Minister, has done a lot. And I think that he epitomizes what a regional minister should be. So he would be when it comes to the top performing ministers. I'll start with Henry Korte.
Right.
Now, the next person will be the man who's just tendered in his resignation, Alan Kwadwo Tremantin. And I'd explain. One of the things we've talked about is to engage in import substitution. One of the things we've talked about is to actually, have an economy that is able to produce and an economy that is not always dependent on imports. So, yes, we have tried it in the past. We tried the cottage industry and everything, as a way of setting up industries that would engage in import substitution and overall, help the Ghanaian economy grow because we are import dependent and we say we want to be export dependent. What has happened? Under his tenure as Trade and Industry Minister in charge of policy and programs within the trade and industry sector, you have seen vehicle assembling plants in this country. You have seen a lot of efforts being made to actually drive our import substitution agenda. So you've seen, for instance, Nissan coming to this country. You've seen VW in this country. Just recently, you saw the commissioning or the inspection of the Kia vehicle assembly plant around Amasaman area, for instance. You have seen the processing of a juice factory in this country as a result of, how do you call it, a 1D, 1F, this thing. And for a lot of people who, and let me be very honest with you, I said at the beginning of 1D, 1F that 1D, 1F, yes, the policy was to have a factory in every district. There was always going to be a difficulty with it. As much as they have tried, the pressures on the government also took a few things away from it, and I'm not going to go into that. I'm just going to go into why I believe that is a very good policy and why I believe that the trade minister has done very well. I'll also be talking about even the role he played in AFTA and all of that. I'll talk about the industrial parks. I still have a bit of challenge with the policy, the whole policy of industrial parks and how we're going about it, and I'll explain that. But watch this. When you have a factory at a place, now you would export employment. When a community exports employment, what happens is that there is a provision, there's the development of a service sector within that community. I take it again. If we set up a vehicle processing plant right now, okay, persons who go to that company would need certain services around which can be, provided by those within that sector or those within that community. It's only part of the reason that we said in the build up to the creation of new regions. In creating new regions, you are actually moving development to these areas, also because it will lead to the provision of employment. And once you export employment, you introduce a service and a booming service sector.
Right.
Let's get to the establishment of industrial parks. And we've talked about having 10 industrial parks in this country at the time, in all the 10 regions. And that was on part of the policy that we were talking about. My challenge with that even is that when you want to have an industrial park, that's like a cluster development, and there should be a sense of cluster. So industrial parks ordinarily are not things that government will set up. But there is also another theory in the books that says governments can even start setting up of a cluster development and get people to go there. I belong to the other school of thought that says let the industry itself begin to see that sense of cluster before you get in.
Right.
But they have believed in the fact that in the other school of thought that says government should set it up. So you've seen the Dawa Industrial Park and all of that coming up. You've seen the role that Ghana has played in AFTA. Today we have one of our own, Dr. Dano Macaulay, being awarded contracts by it. Now, by virtue of bringing even that to the head office to Ghana, you're drawing attention to Ghana on the African continent. And so a lot of the conversations had in Ghana, and you've had a lot of Ghanaian businesses taking part in these conversations. And before his resignation, one of the things he had consistently talked about was to ensure that Ghanaian businesses took advantage of the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement to be able to develop the businesses in this country. If I look at all of these things, if I look at the over 100 factories that have been set up, and there's a school of thought that says, oh, but some of these factories are existing factories. In fact, in theory, it is said that the between 60 to 80%, because some scholars put it at 60, some put it at 70, some put it at 80. So we say between 60 to 80% of new jobs are created by existing industries. So when you target existing industries with technical support and financial support, it is the right thing to do if you really want to create jobs. And I say these would be my top 2 ministers.
All right. So Winston has settled on Henry Korte, the Greater Accra Regional Minister, Member of Parliament for Ayawaso Central, and he's crediting him with the relocation of the onion markets from Agbogbulushi to Ajenkotoko. And the other campaigns, Operation Clean Your Frontage, for instance. And Alan Chiramating, who's just resigned, the trade minister, his drive to get investors into the country. You've talked about the various vehicle assembling plants, the location of the AFTA Secretariat in Ghana. Earlier, Evans mentioned Dr. Matthew Puku-Prempeh, the energy minister, and his reason is because he's kept the lights on. And Samuel Abujinapo, the lands and natural resources minister, because he's handled the Galamsey fight well, if you like, not because he's won the fight against Galamsey, but he's making tremendous efforts.